Welcome to Palm Bay Live, celebrating 2 years in business.
But Mr. Speaker, there's, that's not our job to legislate. It's just not our job to legislate regret. And I would also argue that, especially if you're a person of faith, you make decisions, and if you're seeking forgiveness, you seek forgiveness. But my point is allowing that parent to be the arbitrator, not government.
Time having expired for questions, are there amendments to the amendment?
None in the desk, Mr. Speaker.
Are there substitute amendments?
None in the desk, Mr. Speaker.
Is there debate? Representative Rainer Goolsbee in debate.
Thank you so much, Mr. Speaker. And Representative Eskamani, thank you so much for this really good amendment. When we're talking about parents and choice, I feel like, I often say, make it make sense. Like, we allow some folks to have choice. We allow other folks not to have choice. And we can't legislate this because we just feel like if we agree with one way or how someone lives their life. I do want to address the point that Representative Andrade made when it came to the parent and divorced parents. And if one parent takes the child and one parent doesn't agree, that's the beautiful thing about the court system. That's the beautiful thing about the family law court system. That parent can go, he or she or they can petition the court, and they could talk to the court and let them know that they have a problem with the activity that the other parent is doing with regard to their child. So I don't think that that's relevant here. I think what's relevant is that allows a parent to make a choice with regard to this particular event. And I think if we're about choices, and once again, if this is really the Thunderdome of freedom, it feels a little bit like the Thunderdome of hate sometimes. I don't know. But if it's really the Thunderdome of freedom, we should vote up on this really good amendment.
In debate.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And speaking of the Thunderdome of hate, I'm stunned. I'm actually going to argue for the back rows here. I'm stunned at the level of discrimination that has been put forth in this amendment. The benefits here that are supposedly applied would not include what the folks in the back row refer to as non-binary children. It says his or her parents. Well, we've been told over and over again that apparently there's 75 different options that you can be. And so all of those children apparently get excluded from this. But beyond that, and again, continuing down the horribly discriminatory, what was it, Thunderdome of hate category, not all children are supervised by their parents. Some of us aren't so lucky. We may have a guardian, we may be in a foster home, we could be in a whole variety of things. So I find it stunning that we would choose to say we're going to give rights to parents, but we're not going to give rights to other folks that have legal authority over children. So because of this, we heard the Thunderdome of hate that's embodied in this amendment. I'd encourage you to vote it down.
Additional debate. Seeing none, you recognize to close on your amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'll just bring up a few quick closing points. So one, to your point, Representative Fine, we're using language that's in statute. Statute keeps it pretty clear to his or her. So I'm just mimicking that language in statute. Two, I actually agree with you. We can amend it to include guardians. If you want to help me with that, I welcome that assistance. I can't file a file amendment by myself, members. But y'all know what the intent of this is. And I also just want to highlight questions made by Representative Andrade. I did check when it comes to the concern you brought up of preemption. Nothing in this is preemption. It doesn't express preemption. And so I don't think there's a need to be concerned about preempting stronger safeguards that already exist for strip clubs. It will not change that, as I noted, whatsoever. And so again, I just want to emphasize that our intention with this amendment is just to respect the unique and diverse families of this sweet state of Florida. And I also want to emphasize, as I mentioned earlier, my concerns about the bill sponsor's definition, or I guess refined definition of the Miller test, is that we're using language that does not have case law precedent. And again, I just don't think it's appropriate for the state government to establish what those community standards are. The Miller test specifically speaks to community standards. We're creating a new standard of the state. And I've been given no definition of what that means. And so members, you might not think any of this, the type of drag shows that exist in my district that are fun and lively and joyous and hilarious and flamboyant, you might not like those personally. You might not think it's appropriate to bring a teenager to that. I might not think it's appropriate for teenagers to go to R-rated movies. I might not think it's appropriate for teenagers to, I don't know, to some other location. Like, the reality is that we all have our different bias and standards and ways that we've been raised. I grew up watching British sitcoms on PBS, which is why my humor can be very dry sometimes. But some of that language, in retrospect, I was like, wow, like that was kind of like cheeky, right? So again,
bring it in for a landing. We're out of time.
Will do, Mr. Speaker. So again, those standards are so different. And I would watch those with my parents next to me, and they could answer questions that I had that maybe was a little cheeky and dry humor. And so again, we're adding to this bill. We're requiring parents to be there. And again, I think that's a standard everyone can get behind. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Having closed on our amendment, all those in favor of the adoption of the amendment signify by saying yay. Yay. Opposed, no. Show the amendment fails. Read the next amendment.
Representative Nixon offered the following amendment with title amendment. Barcode 270127. Remove line 125 and insert an amendment.
Representative Nixon, you're recognized to explain your amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is simply another parental rights amendment. And basically it's saying that it would only be a violation if someone other than the minor's parent or legal guardian takes them to one of these shows.
Are there questions of the sponsor? Representative Andrade.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Representative Nixon, this exemption exempting parents from bringing children to one of these shows that expose them to potentially genitals or nudity or sex acts. My one concern with the unintended consequence of this is, what if the parent bringing the child is the performer?
What's your question about the amendment?
It's an
Can you
exemption.
rephrase that?
What if the parent or the legal guardian that brought their child to the performance is also the one engaging in the performance?
How would that be affected by your amendment is the question. You're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. That's outside the scope of this amendment.
Representative Andrade, another try to rephrase.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Representative Nixon, no, it is not.
Is there a question?
Well, yeah,
You wanna
I'll
rephrase your question?
restate my question, or I'll ask for a clarification from the speaker about whether or not my question about exempting parents in this context is outside the scope of her amendment.
Representative Nixon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Look, similar to what Rep. Escamani stated earlier, this is in regards to like the chilling effect as it relates to this bill. As I stated earlier, there are some people that take offense to things like Ruby Bridges and that type of stuff. As a parent, I know what is inappropriate for my child. So if you all are saying that parents shouldn't have rights, then you would definitely vote down on this amendment. And it seems that's the way you're going.
Representative Andrade.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Representative Nixon, my question again, though, is a performance by an individual does not require a crowd. The exemption says a parent won't be subjected to this criminal violation. I'm just asking, not the intent, but the effect of your amendment, if it would potentially expose vulnerable children to being abused by parents or legal guardians.
Representative Nixon.
No. Thanks, Mr.
Representative Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Nixon, do you think that minors should be allowed at these adult live performances? And at what age would you say it's appropriate for children to be there?
Representative Nixon.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker. That is outside the scope of my amendment, but I also think minors should be allowed to learn who Ruby Bridges is.
Representative Anderson, you have a follow-up? Additional questions? Representative Fine.
Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So again, focusing on drafting, and I do appreciate you remembering legal guardians this time. You're saying a violation of subsection 3 by someone other than the minor's parent or legal guardian constitutes a misdemeanor. How could, under the bill, a minor's parent or legal guardian get in trouble under the current bill as written? I'm trying to understand the problem that you're attempting to address.
Representative Nixon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I believe your bill is so vague and it's going to have a chilling effect, and folks are going to go after parents. And so that's the reason that I've drafted this amendment.
Representative Fine.
Thank you. I mean, I guess vagueness. Oh, all right. I'm not going to say that. The bill says a person may not knowingly admit a child to an adult live performance. I can understand your view that adult live performance might be vague. That's not relevant to your amendment. What part of a person may not knowingly admit a child to whatever would involve their parents or legal guardian?
Representative Nixon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So my concern is there's things that happen on the street and things like that all the time. I just don't want the parent to be, punished or whatever. So again, like that's pretty much outside the scope of the amendment. I am concerned, again, that parents who should have rights and they know what is appropriate or inappropriate for their child, they should not be punished as well as their legal guardian.
Representative Fine, we got 24 seconds.
I'll save it for debate.
Okay. Are there amendments to the amendment?
None on the desk, Mr. Speaker.
Are there substitute amendments?
None on the desk, Mr. Speaker.
Is there debate? Representative Fine, in debate.
Thank you. Drafting matters. As I answered in questions, this bill does not penalize parents. So if a parent were to somehow get their child into an adult live performance, that parent would not be responsible, at least under this bill. I'm sure if you did, it might be responsible under other things. What this bill says, if you read it, and again, it's only 5 pages long, is that a person may not knowingly admit a child. The bill is focused on the admittor or the host, the venue or the person taking a ticket. This amendment is not necessary because I guess every once in a while, perhaps the parent happens to be taking the ticket from the child. But unless it is the parent doing the admitting or the guardian doing the admitting, they can't get in trouble anyway. So this amendment is poorly drafted. It shows a lack of understanding of the underlying bill. It's just not necessary, and I hope you'll vote it down.
Additional debate. Representative Escamani, in debate.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If the bill sponsors point that it's not needed, then what's the harm in just adding the clarity? And I also share too that there actually could be events, a parent could host a drag queen at a birthday party for their 17-year-old. Again, I know these are, different hyperboles, but I think they're to your point, Representative Fine, there could be a situation where a parent is the one that's being potentially targeted. And again, that could be a ticketed event, in the backyard or something like that. We have nonprofit organizations that focus on LGBTQ plus youth, and they'll host a drag queen, for their event, and parents might be on the board of that nonprofit. So I think there are concerns that are not explicitly stressed that the consequences could be pretty far reaching. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Additional debate. Seeing none, you're recognized to close on your amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Look, at the end of the day, again, this is all about parental rights. My colleagues in the front row often talk about the fact that parents need to have the rights to determine, how their children are educated, all types of things. I believe parents know whether or not something is inappropriate. And so if I'm also concerned that this bill may have unintended consequences on parents who do decide to take their children to places that they don't deem inappropriate. Again, this bill is way too subjective. Please vote up on this amendment.
Having closed on the amendment, all those in favor of the adoption of the amendment say yay. Yay. Opposed, no? No. Show the amendment fails. Read the next amendment.
Representative Nixon offered the following amendment with title amendment. Barcode 440207. Between lines 127 and 128, insert an amendment.
Representative Nixon, you're recognized to explain your amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to go by the motto of Mr. Eric Mays. However, I will go by the motto of former First Lady Michelle Obama. When they go low, we go high. So I will withdraw this amendment.
Member having withdrawn the amendment, show the amendment withdrawn. Read the next amendment.
Representative Nixon offered the following amendment with title amendment. Barcode 826249. Between lines 127 and 128, insert an amendment.
Representative Nixon, you're recognized to explain the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This amendment provides that the criminal offense of knowingly admitting a child to an adult live performance doesn't apply to an adult live performance consisting of persons dressed in X-Men costumes.
Are there questions of the sponsor? Representative Barrero in questions.
Mr. Speaker, Representative Nixon, does your amendment attempt to target individual members of this chamber?
Representative Nixon.
No. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. No, it does not.
Additional questions? Representative Masulo in questions.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Nixon, if the individuals dressed in X-Men costumes decided to engage in some sort of illicit sexual activity, would you consider that to be something that you would not want to have for your amendment?
Representative Nixon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We're just talking about dress, not behavior.
Additional questions? Representative Masulo in questions.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Then your amendment actually wouldn't apply to the bill then, correct?
Representative Nixon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It would by dress.
Additional questions? Representative Roach in questions. Representative Roach.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, admittedly, I might be a little out of touch with current culture, but I actually do not know what an X-Man is. Could you explain that to me? Is that some kind of cartoon character or something? What is an X-Man?
Representative Nixon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As my colleague up front stated earlier, you know, we have Google on these laptops. So you can take a look. Thank you.
Additional questions of the sponsor? Representative Roach in questions.
I appreciate that, but can you not define it? It's your amendment.
Representative Nixon, can you define X-Men?
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Asked and answered.
Additional questions of the sponsor? Seeing none, are there amendments to the amendment?
None on the desk.
Are
Mr.
there
Speaker.
substitute amendments?
None on the desk, Mr.
Is there
Speaker.
debate? Representative Escamani in debate.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just would have asked for another exemption for Star Wars costumes. A big Star Wars fan, but thanks, Rep. Nixon, for thinking about us nerds out there. I appreciate it.
Representative Fine in debate.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is not a serious amendment. It is not worthy of us. It is not worthy of the chamber on this very serious issue. Don't waste any more time debating it. Just vote it down.
For the debate, Representative Rainer Goolsbee.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I actually wasn't going to debate, but when people talk about things not being serious and making broad statements, I do think it's serious. I do think that we need to make sure that having this conversation, it is worthy of the chamber, especially when we want to define people and say what is and who is not acceptable. So Representative Nixon, I thank you for bringing this very good amendment about X-Men in their costumes.
Additional debate on the amendment. Seeing none, you recognize to close on the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Look, members, this bill is absurd. The vitriol and the hate surrounding the LGBTQ community is absurd. X-Men, mutants, they were in comic books. They were created as an ode to civil rights leaders that were being attacked, who wanted to fight for equity, diversity, and inclusion. That is the reason that I drafted this amendment today. We have to be very careful as leaders here in the state about what we say, how we say it, and the impacts versus the intent, the impacts of our actual bills. And so with that, y'all, let's vote up for equality. Thank you.
Close on the amendment. All in favor, say yay. Yay. Opposed, no. Show the amendment fails. Read the next amendment.
Representative Nixon offered the following amendment with title amendment. Barcode 079711. Between lines 127 and 128, insert an amendment.
Representative Nixon, you're recognized to explain the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Look, we often create special carve-outs for police and fire, so I thought, why should this bill be any different? That's the amendment.
Are there questions of the sponsor? Questions of the sponsor? Seeing none, are there amendments to the amendment?
None in the desk, Mr. Speaker.
Are there substitute amendments?
None in the desk, Mr. Speaker.
Is there debate? You recognize to close.
Waive close.
Having waived close, all those in favor of the adoption of the amendment signify by saying yay. Opposed, no. Show the amendment fails. Read the next amendment.
None in the desk, Mr. Speaker.
Members, before we go on to the next bill, I'll recognize Representative Snyder for recognition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And as the other half of the Martin County legislative delegation comes over, we've got several clerks of the court from around the state here with us today, but someone we wanted to call out especially, my clerk and the president of the Clerks Association for the state, Carolyn Timon. Great to see you, longtime family friend. Thanks for being here.
Show the bill rolled over to third reading. Read the next bill.
By Commerce Committee, Regulatory Reform and Economic Development Subcommittee, and Representative Maggard and others. CS for House Bill 89, a bill to be entitled an act relating to building construction.
Representative Maggard, you're recognized to explain your bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. CS for HB 89 is an act relating to building construction. This bill will remove fire and building inspectors' ability to veer away from Florida building and fire codes when doing inspection and making changes without just cause. This bill also allows Class A air conditioning technicians and mechanical contractors to work on another side of the electrical and HVAC system that are already trained for it. That is the bill, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Maggard, having explained his bill, members, we're open for questions. Questions of Representative Maggard. We're on CS for HB 89. Any questions of the sponsor? Are there any amendments?
None in the desk, Mr. Speaker.
Show the bill rolled over to third reading. Read the next bill.
By Children, Families, and Seniors Subcommittee, Civil Justice Subcommittee, and Representative Cassell and others. CS for House Bill 97, a bill to be entitled an act relating to domestic violence.
Representative Cassell.